First of all, I would like to thank Dar Al-Azhar Al-Islamiyya for the invitation to speak within the frame of the current cultural season. I am very honored to be here with you tonight and to have this opportunity to share some ideas regarding a topic that has kept me busy for several years now. As an architect and historian of art interested in the legacy of architectural heritage, I have often wondered about the tradition, or more exactly about the relation between tradition and modernity. Why did certain traditions disappear? Under which circumstances did they disappear? How were they replaced? And how can we understand the surprising fact that these forgotten traditions are sometimes suddenly rediscovered and become, in certain cases, shocking? The Egyptian architect Hassan Fathi has provided extremely interesting answers to these questions that I will discuss tonight. I shall begin my talk by briefly presenting the career of the Egyptian architect Hassan Fathi, who lived from 1900 till 1989. I will then develop some of the main ideas he developed concerning the tradition. In 1936, year of the Egyptian accession to independence, Fathi's work took a dramatic swing in a new direction. He, who had until then been working with the neo-styles and modern movement imported from Europe through the English professors who taught him at the Polytechnical School in Cairo, began to focus on the pre-Napoleonic national heritage, that is, the Islamic heritage that had developed from the crossing of many cultures. Included in a group of intellectuals dispossessed of their history and seeking a re-evaluation of the Arab dwelling, Fathi started acting in order to recover a lost tradition. Starting in the 1940s, he recognized traditional elements of Egyptian architecture and integrated them in his work. His plans contained plenty of these initial reinterpretations. An entire lifetime would not have been enough for him to fully explore and refine his knowledge of Cairene, Egyptian and Arab architecture, craft and applied art, from which he intended to gather the seeds of modern Arab architecture, the latter being the objective of a veritable crusade, and the architect's quest was embodied thereafter by this new credo. And you can see on the screen a sentence which is very important, and we have to think about it now also. Championing a nation's cause, he describes in many texts how the Arabic architecture was hijacked from its natural evolution that had been broken almost a century and a half earlier by the process of colonization. Arab architecture needed to find its own modernity, a modernity that which it would have otherwise evolved naturally. The intrusion of Western architectural models into Cairo and well elsewhere in the Arab world and in Africa had come into conflict with the complex and refined system of traditional building. In the cities, extrovert blocks had taken the place of palaces and houses, like you can see, that looked inwards toward their sahn or patio, thus upsetting the urban structure and the character of the streets. The flexibility of housing that had been fashioned through agglutination, like the Arab language, had been replaced by westernized typologies. The grace and appropriateness of older architectural and decorative devices had given way to charmless innovations and inappropriate technologies. In Fathi's view, the problem was particularly accurate in the Egyptian countryside, and from that moment on, Fathi completely changed his way of designing. And you can see, as in the first picture, the beautiful designs he made to imagine a new Arab house. He rejected the foreign models and tried to catch the very specific way of building and crafting of the Arab world. He rediscovered the beauty and the cleverness of the urban Mamluk or Ottoman dwellings, sometimes even palaces, as well as the adequacy of the vernacular traditional Egyptian architecture. And here you can see very beautiful designs for projects who were executed for two brothers of the same family, and those are indeed architectural designs in the way of Hassan Fathi in the 40s. Walking through the narrow streets of the old Cairo, often with his younger colleague and friend Ramses Wissa Wassef, he admired the refinement of ancient houses. It is of little knowledge that Fathi also played a prevailing role in the history of monumental restoration in the 60s, along with the biggest Italian specialists like Piero Gazzola. In 1968, he attended as the representative of the United Arab Republic the important conference of Pistoia, organized by the UNESCO, a decisive step in raising the awareness of architectural heritage and historic cities in Europe. The observations of Hassan Fathi led him to understand the adequacy, or as he preferred to say, appropriateness of the traditional architectural devices used by the ancient. Organized around one or many patios or sahn, the inward-looking house did preserve the intimacy of the inhabitants. At the same time, the patio, often decorated with a fountain, and the inner gardens brought some freshness. Maybe I stay on this one. They brought some freshness, and it was a forceful argument in warm countries. He discovered then that the Ka'a, the central piece of the typology, was flanked by Iwanat, and the Durka'a, of which covered by a dome, like you can see here at Shurshekha, and he intended to restore it instead of using the Western living room. Although in the 40s, Fathi and his wealthy clients were still hesitating between the living room and the car, the changeover became complete in the 60s. In 1969, Fathi dedicated his important paper for the International Conference on the Millennium of Cairo to this key element. He gave a new and highly symbolic interpretation of the emblematic space of the Ka'a, whose origins date back to the court of Bedouin dwellings open to the sky. It was the space of transition between the celestial and cosmic universe and the terrestrial domestic space. The place of the Ka'a, here it is after an old Ka'a of a palace in Cairo, and here you can see what was previously the court, open to the sky, and then domed with a Shurshekha, and beside you have the Iwanat. he gave a symbolic interpretation, and this space was a transition between the celestial cosmic universe and the terrestrial domestic space. The Durga could reach considerable heights, while the Iwanat, in which the Masatib were placed, were on human scale. The dome that was situated above this court, while continuing to represent the celestial vault, was the result of a gradual architectural evolution. Doing so, Fathy contrasted the prosaic and materialistic character of Western modernity of the plain living room with the symbolic richness of the Arabic tradition, which he sought to reintroduce into contemporary domestic architecture. As he claimed in his late publication, Natural Energy and Vernacular Architecture Principles, an example with reference to hot, arid climates in 1986, traditional architecture was in agreement with the climate. He pointed out that the traditional Arab house was working like a natural fan, and you can see on those designs, drawings, how he represents the flow of the wind coming inside the house. It is very important for him, and it was important in the traditional way of building in other places. You can see here the beautiful Hawa Mahal in Jaipur, an 18th century palace with a lot of windows in the facade to bring the air inside the palace. And it was a way of catching the dominant wind throughout the Malkaf. Maybe I return to this one. You can see an example of an old Malkaf here in Cairo. And this is a wind catcher, or Malkaf, and it brings the wind inside the house, and then it can circulate to refresh the inner of the house. The Malkaf worked together with the Mashrabeya, and the Mashrabeya is probably one of the most significant elements of the Islamic architecture, but I will go to the Mashrabeya a bit further. I just want to show you some projects of Hassan Fathy, showing the way he tries to play with tradition for doing new houses. And this was a very beautiful house constructed for his friend painter Hamed Said near Cairo. And you can see it has an inner court, excuse me. It has a patio here, and the house is around this patio, and you have beautiful Iwan on the outside, which are taken from tradition. You can see here the details of the house also with Mashrabeya, of course, if my arrow is here, yeah, and also the way of doing the door traditionally. Then another beautiful house, abandoned, quite abandoned nowadays, the Saif El Nasr house in the Fayoum, and you can see here the wind catcher or Malkaf, bringing air inside of the car, which is domed here. The inner of the Hamdi Saif El Nasr house, the space of the car, and some decorative details, very beautifully designed, with Kamaria and beautiful soils also. Later in the 60s, he designed the apartment of Shaira Merhez, which is on the top of an apartment building, and it is very special, like a villa on the top of an apartment building. You can see here
the Malkaf, or wind catcher, again taking the inside of the car with a shurshera on the top. And here we are inside the car, and again some details showing the furniture, the beautiful doors, the mashrabeyat, and so on. In the 80s, the Kazroni house, who is on the Saqqara Road, still existing in a good condition, with beautiful details, again, claustra, mashrabeya, and kamaria. And now another house of the 80s, more simple in decoration, very modern or contemporary, as Hassan Fathy would have said. So I am coming now to the mashrabeya, showing you an old one of the many mashrabeyat of Beit El Suhaimi in Cairo. And this prevailing element of the traditional applied arts was for Hassan Fathy the result of a kind of know-how associated with traditional Arab creative genius, and Fathy hoped to help perpetuate this element. Created by a cabinet maker, Bioul Bil Arabi Shurl al-Naggar, the screen of turned wood was for him the ultimate symbol of Arab architectural and artistic tradition. An ingenious sun-shading device placed in front of windows, it filtered out excessive light and allowed those inside the building to see without being seen, both preserving the privacy of the harem and allowing air to circulate in the apartments. Its interlaced structure could be finely or heavily wrought, and its pattern infinitely varied. Convinced of the artistic and technological supremacy of the mashrabeya above all other architectural elements, and it is interesting to note that today the word mashrabeya is used in common Arabic, well, in Egyptian at least, to mean any sort of craft object. And Fathy was himself a collector of antique mashrabeyat, using them to decorate his modern homes. Here you can see how he describes the mashrabeya in his talk to the Millennium Conference in '69. The mashrabeya was so central to Fathy's thought that he dedicated a whole play to it. Written in 1942, revised in 1984, and published in Lebanon after his death. Qissat al-Mashrabeya, or the Tale of the Mashrabeya, is a key item in Fathy's oeuvre. And here you can see the front page of the tale, the written tale of the Mashrabeya. The hero of Fathy's autobiographical tale is called Khaled. As a young nationalist in his 30s, he carries within him the culture of East and West. Khalid campaigns for the perpetuation of Oriental ways of life that do not contradict modern life. He condemns the changes that are being forced on all aspects of his country's civilization, and in particular on its architecture. Although over 35 years old, he does not marry because he has not yet found the house where he would like to see his children be born and grow up. There is no longer a single palace or any architecture that has not been westernized or disfigured without any sense of elegance. Khalid sets about seeking ways to pass on the know-how of the Muallim. Transmission is the only way that the art of the mashrabeya, of the wood turning, of stained glass, of pavements, and of all the tried and tested techniques of vernacular construction will be able to survive. And Khaled asks, how can we find authenticity? How can we reorient art and crafts? And how can tradition be renewed to make it suited to our modern environment? And such are the questions that Fathi is preoccupied with in the 40s. The Mashrabeya is a kind of synecdoche of Egyptian and Arab architecture, and it is the protagonist that alone embodies the survival of ancient architecture and tradition in general. I show you here not only Mashrabeya, but because what is very interesting is the way of closing a space without closing it totally, which happened also with the claustras and other devices that Fathi often uses in his architecture. The Mashrabeya thus became the symbolic object of Fathi's theory of architecture, which represents at once the ambivalence of the Arab tradition, both backward and forward-looking, the jewel of the decorative arts applied to architecture. He used it in several buildings, as well as the claustras, which are another means to filter the light and separate the inner from the outer space. Now, let me turn to the most important shock that struck Fathi with respect to traditional architecture, which is the tradition in vernacular architecture and the experiment of New Gurna. New Gurna and the story of this experiment, Architecture for the Poor. Here you can see several pictures showing the buildings built in the village of New Gurna. And it is probably the masterpiece of the Egyptian architect Hassan Fathi. As he conceived New Gurna, a peasant's village imagined in the mid-40s to relocate a population of inhabitants living above the pharaonic tombs in the context of the reform of the Egyptian countryside, the architect was convinced that he was writing a contemporary page of his history, of the history of Egyptian architecture, using the traditional technology of mud bricks, vaults, and cupolas. Here you can see the title of the book. He wrote about it, but in French. In English, it is Architecture for the Poor. It is translated a bit different. And here you can see the models he discovered for building the new village of Gurna. Before building New Gurna, he visited different villages and looked for possible models on Egyptian soil. He visited many places, described the poverty of most of them and the failure of expensive new industrialized materials to provide good quality conditions of life. On the contrary, in Aswan and Nubia, and here we are in Gharb Aswan, he discovered idyllic villages, a kind of Miltonian paradise in their original purity, far from the ugliness of misunderstood processes of industrialization. The shock in front of those traditional beautiful houses was intense. And I quote here Hassan Fathi. On entering the first village, Gharb Aswan, I knew that I had found what I had come for. It was a new world for me, a whole village of spacious, lovely, clean, and harmonious houses, each more beautiful than the next. Here you can see another picture from Gharb Aswan. I continue with quoting. There was nothing else like it in Egypt. A village from some dream country, perhaps from some Hogar hidden in the heart of the great Sahara. whose architecture had been preserved for centuries, uncontaminated by foreign influences, from Atlantis it could have been. It was like a vision of architecture before the fall, before the money, industry, greed, and snobbery that have cut architectural from its true roots in nature. The architect was thus quickly convinced that the village he was about to plan should rely upon traditional know-how. You can see here some watercolors he drew after the Nubian houses. Fathi chose to use for the new village of Gourna the mud brick. Mud brick بالعربي هو طوب الأخضر. And طوب الأخضر is a very old tradition, Egyptian tradition. As you can see here, Hatshepsut making a raw brick on this relief. Considering its very cheap price and the economic constraint was important in building the village, Fathi actually went as far as to imagine an architecture that would be executed by the inhabitants themselves, thus short-circuiting the Western process of architectural production and its prohibitive costs. He imagined as a master plan that masons could teach a range of architectural typologies and simple know-how to the inhabitants. New Gourna would be the ultimate illustration of self-help, a social utopia that Fathi defended furiously throughout his career. And nowadays, in Gourna, people are still making raw bricks and are able to repair their houses if necessary. Material tradition, spiritual heritage, the spirit of a place, and sociological survey are the ingredients from which Fathi wanted to build a contemporary model village stripped of the violent inadequacy of modern, expensive, industrialized technology. And this technology, as we saw, was very ancient and close to New Gourna. We can visit nowadays still the beautiful building of the Ramesseum, which is in raw bricks also and lasting for more than 1,000 years. As a champion of lost tradition, Fathi was disappointed by the devastating effect of the tabula rasa approach on towns, and he desired to reconnect with the lessons of the past. For the village, and you can see here a beautiful picture we discovered in the archives. It was never really published, and you can see Gourna just after part of Gourna finished at the end of the 40s. We cannot say it's an old-fashioned architecture. It's really modern architecture out of mud brick and beautifully executed. And the village, well, here you can, maybe you know those pictures. I remind you how we can make a vote for a house without using any wood, which is very expensive in Egypt, and how the masons are working to build those very special catenary votes able to cover the spaces. And here you can see another experiment in rural architecture, like the first houses of New Gourna. This drawing is very famous. It is the master plan for Gourna, executed like a pharaonic design. And The village would be divided in 4 sections, which would correspond to the 4 badana of the Gurni. And then a maze of small secondary streets linking the semi-open courtyards of the group of the houses would protect the badana privacy and discourage outsiders from venturing in. And the fellah would live with his family and his animals in a house designed according to his specific needs. And here I show you some places of the village. Some of them has disappeared now. This was the school for the boys. There was another school for the girls also. This is the theater, still in good condition. Here is the mosque, which does exist. And here you can see the main place of Gurna. Here you can see one of the entrances of the village, which is not in that condition now. And here we are, I did something wrong, on the top of the mosque and inside the mosque. The drawing, the beautiful drawing for the project of the Farouk First Mosque by Hassan Fathi, inspired by the mosque of the villages in Upper Egypt. And here, what is remaining of the vaults of the marketplace, which is also actually in a bad condition. The peasants' village, invented by Hassan Fathi in the mid-40s to relocate a population of inhabitants living above the pharaonic tombs, provoked many reactions, from praise to condemnation. New Gurna's critical reception reached its maximum at the end of the 50s, and you can see that the village was flooded. You can see here, because the Gurni didn't want to go and live there and leave the places where they were just above the pharaonic tombs and their treasures. So it was a quite complicated story. The critical weight of Fathi Ghanem, and here you can see some picture taken from a film which was made out of a novel, the novel entitled Al-Gabal, the mountain, certainly served to reinforce negative views of the village in Egypt. In this early paraphrase of the story of New Gurna, Ghanem paints a raceless portrait of a westernized Orientalist architect intended to represent Hassan Fathi. Poor him. And he says he wanted to impose on the Gurnis a way of life they do not want. Ghanem notably stigmatizes the use of the dome, a synonym of mortuary architecture, in domestic building, and shows how little the engineer brought from Cairo understood the user's mentality. Of all criticism of New Gurna, the comparison of the village houses to funerary architecture still remains till today the most indelible within a superstitious society. On the opposite, Western observer appraised really much the work of Hassan Fathi. They were very excited to see what they call this essentially human architecture integrated into landscape, representing the survival of a tradition that had escaped the clutches of the machine age. For example, New Gurna was not completed for reasons that include bureaucratic inertia, the reticence of the Gurnis, and covert boycotting by heavy technology lobbyists. Using age-old construction techniques that still survived in Nubia and which he wished to revive in the spirit of the Nahda, Fathi projected himself into his own time and invented a possible model for contemporary Egyptian rural architecture. I am coming to the end, I hope, as I have 5 minutes left. The revelations Fathi experienced in Nubia in 1941 gave him access to a new vision of the world. From this, he built up what might be called his theory of tradition, which he continued to reinforce throughout the key stages of his career. If, and I am quoting, culture is the result of the interaction between man's intelligence and his environment to satisfy his physical and spiritual needs, tradition results from the quintessence of experiments that have been tried and succeeded over generations in a particular place. And he goes on saying, yet, other solutions may not be worked out fully before many generations have passed, and this is where tradition had a creative role to play, for it is only by tradition, by respecting and building on the work of earlier generations, that each new generation may make some positive progress toward the solution of the problem. Architecture, and it is still Hassan Fathi speaking, architecture is still one of the most traditional arts. A work of architecture is meant to be used, its form is largely determined by precedent, and it is set before the public where they must look at it every day. The architect should respect the work of his predecessors and the public sensibility by not using his architecture as a medium of personal advertisement. I think nowadays this should be heard by many architects. Indeed, no architect can avoid using the work of earlier architects. However hard he strains after originality, by far the larger part of his work will be in some tradition or other. Here you can see a plate from another tale he wrote in the 40s, which is the tale of Utopia, very nice story. And he is also blaming the different Western architecture, and you can see here a couple searching, walking in streets with skyscrapers. We are certainly in the US world, and they are protected by the deess, the goddess Nut, the pharaonic goddess, which is a very interesting plane. And this really is illustrating the way he would have liked to see the future of architecture, still embodied in the tradition. His interest in Egyptian, Arab, and Mediterranean heritage manifested itself in depth investigation of building techniques, typological devices, and decorative elements. He sought to extract lessons from these that could revitalize the foundations of contemporary Egyptian, Arab, and Mediterranean production, and which would stand out from the superficial Orientalism that some of his Western and Eastern predecessors practiced. I will stop here, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.